You're listening to The Dirt on the Past, a show on history and archaeology and why it matters today. You can find us on the Extreme History Project website and also on kgbm.org. Thanks for listening. Welcome to The Dirt on the Past from the Extreme History Project and KGBM Community Radio.
Whether digging up a site or dusting off the archives, we bring you some of the most fascinating and cutting-edge research in history and archaeology and discuss why it matters today. Join me, Nancy Mahoney, alongside co-host Crystal Alegria, as we converse with anthropologists, archaeologists,
and historians about how they bring the past alive.
Welcome to this week's edition of The Dirt on the Past. I'm Nancy.
And I'm Crystal.
And we are the co-hosts of the program. This week, we're at the Extreme History Headquarters speaking via Zoom with Dr. Craig Lee, Dr. Shane Doyle, and Professor Ian Van Coller about a collaboration they're undertaking to better understand climate change, human ecology, and ancient high-altitude landscapes by looking through the lens of their three separate disciplines. They have come together for a convergence of interests and research, which we're excited to talk about today. Welcome, Shane, Craig, and Ian.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before we dive into your research project or to your collaborative project, we would like to introduce each of you to our listeners, starting with Dr. Shane Doyle. Shane is a member of the Crow or Apsaalooke Nation. He has a doctorate in curriculum and instruction and completed a postdoctoral appointment in genetics with the University of Copenhagen, Denmark in 2016. With 20 years of teaching experience, Dr. Doyle is a full-time educational and cultural consultant designing American Indian curriculum for many organizations, including Montana Public Schools and the National Park Service. He is currently serving on the board of directors for the Extreme History Project, which we are so glad to have you with us on that board, Shane. Also, Hopa Mountain and the Archaeological Conservancy, as well as serving on the Montana Arts Council Culture and Aesthetics Committee and the Governor Parks and Focus Committee. Shane has been a member of the Extreme History Project from its inception, actually before its inception. Shane, Marcia Fulton, and myself began researching Fort Parker, the first Crow Indian agency, many years ago, probably 10, 20 years ago, and it feels like a long time, but
wow. Yeah.
It's been a while.
But I think Jimi Hendrix was still playing.
I think so.
Yeah.
But Shane was and is still part of the Fort Parker Research Project, which is still ongoing, but such a good foundational member of Extreme History in all ways. So welcome, Shane.
Yes, welcome, Shane.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and now I get the pleasure of introducing, for the first time for me, my husband, Ian Van Coller. So I've never done an introduction for my husband before, and this is pretty exciting. So Ian was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, and grew up in the country during a time of great political turmoil. Those were his formative years, and those became integral to the subject matter that he pursued throughout his artistic career. Van Coller received a national diploma in photography from Technikon Natel in Durban, and in 1992 he moved to the United States to pursue his studies, where he received a BFA from Arizona State University and an MFA from the University of New Mexico. He currently lives in Bozeman, Montana, and is a professor of photography at Montana State University. Ian's work has been widely exhibited nationally and internationally and is held in many significant collections, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Library of Congress, and the South African National Gallery. Van Coller also is a 2018 Guggenheim Fellow and a Fellow at the Explorers Club. His most recent work focuses on environmental issues related to climate change and deep time. These projects have centered on the production of large-scale artist books as well as direct collaborations with paleoclimatologists. So, welcome, Ian.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. And now our third and final guest, Dr. Craig Lee. Craig is a scientist at the Institute of the Arctic and Alpine Research, an instructor at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana, and a principal investigator at Metcalf Archaeological Consultants. His research interests include the human ecology and landscape archaeology of alpine and high-altitude environments. Lee frequently collaborates with Native American people to develop culturally respectful methods for ice patch archaeology, and he delights in sharing his results with the indigenous communities that he works with and the general public as well. In 2016, he was recently awarded the very prestigious Camp Monaco Prize from the Buffalo Bill Center for the West. And so Craig has many, many more things I could talk about, but we're just going to keep it short today with everybody, all three of you. We are so excited to have all of three of you here today. You all work in very different spheres, but have come together recently around Craig's work in the Beartooth Mountain Range. Craig, can you tell us briefly about the work you are doing and how the three of you have come together more recently, but also in the past as well?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me to speak with my friends and colleagues, which is just really cool. I don't think I've actually had an interview with other folks. So
it's kind of a nice change during COVID, isn't it?
It is. It's nice. So let's see. I mean, I guess, it's been some number of years now, and I think part of the opportunity for us to work together has just sort of been serendipitous contacts that we had. And then I think that the secret to making it be successful is that we just didn't back away from it. And we just decided, we should see, where these research directions might take us. I guess I think it's been fairly organic, for lack of a better way to describe it. And were you asking what the nature of the material is that we're working on, or was that enough of an intro?
Yeah, that's a great intro, Craig. But I am asking what the collaboration is focused around. Sure.
Well, I think again, it's kind of tripartite, because there's the field of ice patch archaeology is much larger than just our work in the Rocky Mountains of Montana and Wyoming and Idaho, for that matter. Right, it's a global phenomena, and it's been approached differently because it is a global phenomenon. It's approached differently in different places. In some places, it's I think tends to be a little bit more static and kind of just the usual practice of archaeology, where there's an assessment made of X number of finds coming from certain locations and so forth. But the thing that makes it so special here in the Rocky Mountains is the connection that we've been able to establish with folks through colleagues like Dr. Shane Doyle, where we're trying to not just collect the archaeological data, but trying to see it in context of the still living populations, of course, who are descendant from the folks who made and used the tools that we identify in the archaeological record. And that really isn't novel. That has been an approach that's been around in archaeology for a long time, and yet it doesn't seem like it's always in vogue when maybe it ought to be. And so that's one of the cool connections that's been developed, working with Shane. And then working with Ian has been, again, and archaeologists can feel real comfortable standing up in front of a room of full of other archaeologists and sort of palavering on about the nature of the things that have been identified, and can put up graphs and talk about radiocarbon dates and geek out on that kind of thing. I don't know that it's always as approachable to the public and everybody, right? I'm talking about all the different publics, so the indigenous population publics and the publics of the citizens locally in the states where we're talking about the research today in the greater Yellowstone area, but also on a broader scale, sort of the national and international scale. And I think that's where Ian's artistry, so he's a phenomenal artist and photographer, but his ability to take meaningful pictures that capture the sort of the nuance of the work, the nature of the work, and allow people, I think, the general publics to be able to have a sense of that space and place where we're working. It goes beyond what the capabilities are of, let's say myself as an archaeologist, or, it approaches Shane's gifts as an orator and an educator, but, in concert, when they all come together, it makes the full tight package that I think people are really seeing and enjoying and getting some resonance out of.
Great. Thanks, Craig. And Shane, I want to turn to you now and ask, your background has been fascinating and somewhat varied. You've been working during the past 10 years or so with many archaeologists and doing collaborations of all sorts. You've also been working with geneticists, including Eske Willerslev, on genetic research concerning migrations into the Americas. So I'm interested in how your past work in education and working on peopling of the Americas from a genetic standpoint, as well as an indigenous perspective that you bring to it, what brought you to this collaborative project around the use of high altitude spaces by ancient people in Montana? So these spaces that are landscapes that were perhaps different in terms of their climate in the past, but were really used by people. So what is your interest in, and what are you bringing to and getting out of this collaboration?
Well, great question. First of all, I just have to say, it's because I was invited, they asked me. And so I said yes. And, as you mentioned, we go back a long ways. And what's funny is I was never interested in archaeology. I never felt any compelling reason to go into the study of archaeology. I never learned anything from archaeology, quite frankly, that really deeply affected me. And while I was an undergrad and in grad school, it was always kind of bouncing around, circling around people who I knew were kind of either involved with it or, interested in it and trying to bring me in on it. And I never really was interested at all. And finally, my advisor, when I was getting my dissertation, said, "Shane, I want you to do your study on archaeology." And so I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing archaeology. And it just so happened that they were doing a study on the Second Crow Agency, which is where one of my great grandfathers was born back in 1885. And so it was an opportunity for me to study this really, place that was really important to me and my family. And that's kind of how I started to become really involved with archaeology. And then, working with Eske Willerslev, interesting story about that. Just give me a quick minute here. I first met Crystal. It's been many years ago. And, she was into archaeology and she wanted to connect with Native people. And so I can't even remember how we first met or visited. And then she mentioned my name to Craig. And so I got to know Craig. And then years go by. And then all of a sudden I get an email from this guy, Larry Laren. And he says, there's this guy coming from Denmark. He wants to meet some Indians. I'm wondering if you're interested in coming. And so the rest is history. I met Eske Willerslev. I was mentioned as a co-author on the 2013 nature study of this 12,600-year-old boy at this very famous site. Some time went by, and, I finally asked someone, how did Larry get my name? How did Larry know how to call me? And someone, I think it was Larry, or someone was like, I'm pretty sure Craig Lee told Larry about you. And so, talk about full circle.
Yeah.
By then Craig hadn't really done anything with that Anzac study at all. But I think just kind of looking back on it now, from the perspective I have now, it's really fascinating how all those dots were kind of bouncing around and then all came connected. And now that we're all connected, and I feel like, as time goes by, you find out that you just want to work with quality people, people who have integrity and, try to bring their best to what they do and have an open mind and heart. And as long as you have a team with those kind of people on it, you just kind of want to keep working with them. And inevitably, we keep finding new things and changing history and changing people's perception of Native people. And me, of course, my whole perception of archaeology has, done a 180.
That's a relief to hear, Shane.
Yeah.
Yes, I was a little distressed by your comments earlier. Just kidding.
Well, that's why I wanted to emphasize that, Nancy, because I just wanted to show that if I can be turned around, anyone can be,
There's hope.
And there's hope. And so, yeah, I don't want to ramble on too long. Exactly. I love archaeology. I really want to continue doing it. There's so much to learn from it. And I feel like my task that is pretty clear in front of me that I recognized many years ago is I need to be one of the people who tells the stories about the ancient past that connect it with the modern future in a way that is relevant and important and makes people interested and want to study more.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, I loved what you said about all of us collaborating, working together, because we really do. There's this, and that's I think how it works in the fields often of history and archaeology, is you form these bonds, these groups, these communities, and we definitely have that community amongst all of us. And so, and that's, I guess, one of the things that I wanted to highlight by gathering you all today, is to kind of highlight that community that we have formed together, really over many years. But it's a really important group now, and we all work with each other, we all trust each other, and we all collaborate with each other because we are all good people and have knowledge in different arenas. So I love that you said that, Shane. And Craig, too, really.
That's such an important part.
It is.
I'm friends with all you guys. I love hanging out with you. We having dinners after the lectures is one of the highlights of my year. And it's been a bummer that we haven't been able to do that as much, but I look forward to getting back and doing that soon.
Yes. There's a lot to be said for that, that close community connection. Nancy?
I was just going to say, and I think something that maybe has brought all you three together is that I think you guys like to hike in the mountains. And that's part of, you're bringing all your different expertise, but you all have shared enjoyment around those landscapes, those activities.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, Ian, in 2018, you received the Guggenheim Fellowship and were able to travel to places including Antarctica, Baffin Island in the Canadian territory of Nunavut, and also to Svalbard. And I'm probably saying all those names wrong, but you can correct me. And while you were traveling to all these amazing, very stark, barren places, you were exploring climate change and deep time. How did this work influence you and help you think about these environments that you've been working with Shane and Craig and this collaboration? And then also, so that's kind of the first question. The second question is, can you talk about your work with Craig prior to this newer collaboration, some of the photographic work you've been doing with Craig in the past few years as well?
Yeah, so I'll step back a few years. I started doing this work in 2012. I was invited to join a good friend of mine from graduate school, Todd Anderson, who's a printmaker at Clemson University, to start hiking into Glacier National Park to document the receding glaciers in Glacier National Park. And the turn of the 20th century, there were like 125 glaciers left in the park, and we're down to less than 25, depending on who you talk to. And over several years, we hiked a couple hundred miles to document the receding ice. And I think ice really is the easiest way to see the effects of climate change. When you go to these places, you can see the impact of the melting right in front of you. It's dramatic. And so over the course of years, I started to visit different places, further afield. And I think a change occurred at some point where I started to see a limitation in photography, where, after a while you see one picture of a glacier and you see another picture of a glacier, and it becomes quite repetitive. And at a point, there's not really an entry for a viewer beyond, it's a beautiful picture of ice, or here's a melting iceberg or a melting glacier. And so I realized that there was a knowledge that I didn't possess. And so I wanted to find people who possessed that knowledge, who could tell me about, what was really happening with the ice and what it meant. And so in 2015, I accompanied some scientists to Kalkaya Glacier with them there and learn about their research. And then in 2016, I accompanied one of those same scientists to Kilimanjaro, where his other research cites melting glaciers on the planet. And I wanted to try and tell that story through the perspective of the scientist. It was kind of an epiphany, looking back at my history in South Africa and my interest in colonial scientists, from Europe who were going all over the earth, all over the planet. And those scientists were artists as well as scientists. They would make these drawings and paintings and they would annotate them. And one of my heroes is Alexander von Humboldt. And, for me, it felt like scientists had become, very sort of almost narrow and had difficulty communicating their research to a larger audience. And so I felt like, wow, this is really an amazing opportunity to bring science and art back together and bring it to a larger audience. And so, with the Guggenheim work, it was this amazing opportunity to go to far-flung places, sometimes with scientists, sometimes with other artists, to really try to tell a larger story of climate change, but connected to the science as well, to tell a story. So with Craig, I met Craig through Nancy. Nancy knew about Craig's research in the beartooths, and we connected that way. And I was able to spend a few days with Craig and his team up at his site in the beartooths. And what I do basically is I photograph the place. I try to experience the research site of the scientist, talk to them about what they do to try and get some kind of understanding. And then I make these large photographic prints, and I ask them to physically annotate their research, their understanding of what they're doing of that space directly onto the print. So it brings this, hopefully, photographic art view of that geographic landscape, and then an interpretation from the scientist, in this case, Craig, who is studying this bighorn sheep kill sites in the beartooths together. That's the history of that.
Okay, I want to just take a quick station break, and then I want to finish up with Ian and then ask Craig a little bit about what that experience was like annotating a piece. So you're listening to The Dirt on the Past with co-hosts Nancy Mahoney and Crystal Alegria on kgvm.org or wherever you find your podcasts. We're speaking today with Shane Doyle, Craig Lee, and Ian Van Coller as they discuss a collaborative project they're undertaking to better understand climate change, human ecology, and ancient high-altitude landscapes by looking through the lens of their three separate disciplines. So, Ian, you create then these very large-scale photographic images, and by having the scientists annotate them, you're essentially creating one-of-a-kind pieces. And these are for exhibition, is that correct?
Yes.
So you were asking scientists to do something perhaps that they hadn't ever been asked to do before. And I imagine there was some trepidation they may have experienced. How did you approach getting them to annotate these pieces?
Yes, it's a good question. It really varies a great deal from person to person. And I think part of it has to do with spending time in the field with them and talking about the project and gaining some level of trust. And certainly it has been the case with some people that they're just too busy and it's difficult for them to take on or conceptualize what that might look like. But, on the whole, the response has been incredibly positive, and I'm always astounded by the artistry that these scientists who really haven't been trained as artists possess. Without exception, I think every piece that I've collaborated on has been really successful and really beautiful. And the idiosyncrasies, the knowledge of that person, I think, really comes through. But yeah, I've had people who, I communicate with over time, and they just sort of fall off the map. And at some point, I feel like I'm hassling them, and I sort of don't pursue it any further. But that's been really the minority of people. Most folks have been really excited to collaborate with someone outside their field.
So Shane, I know you're on Ian's list of people to collaborate with, but Craig, you have been on Ian's list, and you actually worked on a collaboration together. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the image that Ian presented you with and what that experience was like being asked to annotate it and what you decided to do.
Well, first off, thank you again, Ian, for allowing me to participate on that with you. It was very much that it was kind of an iterative process. So you first provided me with some examples of what a large format print looks like, and you explained, the sort of range of things that a person might be able to put on there. Basically, it was a blank canvas, although it was your photo. And you said, what kind of information would you like to impart directly on this canvas? And so I, molded over and, sketched out some thoughts. And then just wonderfully, you gave me some fancy pens that worked well on this paper. And it just sat down and started sort of plugging away at it. And in that process, I realized I needed to be a little bit more probably planned with regard to information. So I think that was the end of version 1. And then version 2, I kind of had pulled some of my thoughts together in a different fashion, but I still recognize that, by placing them at various locations on the image, it would really, I guess, sort of, even though it's your image, it would sort of let your audience or the collective audience, whoever sees it, sort of see what I saw in it, in that it's your photo. I can't imagine that sounds very clear in a podcast, but so to tell you what the image looks like, right? It's kind of a long view looking down at ground level of one of these ice patch research sites, and it's got all of the components that are necessary to really talk about it. It's got the melting face of the ice patch. In this particular instance, we know this ice patch to be many, many thousands of years old, and yet it's destabilized. It's clearly destabilized because the area on the high side of it is still covered with fresh snow. The space around it, down at the bottom where it's snow free and there's been a lot of runoff occurring, there's a lot of symmetry between that and the runoff channels that are coming off the surface of the ice patch. And it basically provides a sort of a landscape or a geography that I could put comments on and say, well, these are, this is what's happening in this location, and the area above this where it's not melting is where the ice, at least in this year, might be accreting. And then the areas down below is where it melted away, and where we might be able to find some artifactual materials. And then you included insets of pieces of material that we were actually collecting in the field. And since this wasn't something that happened sort of on right at the snap of the fingers, we had actually been able to complete the analysis on some of those pieces that we had collected, and were able to incorporate things like the radiocarbon ages. As I recall, there were some at least 2 bighorn sheep skulls that were in excess of 5,000 years old, that were washing away from this surface. And it sort of is a moment in time, right? I mean, we've been taking these photos now, or you've been taking photos, with the artistic eye, but we've collected photos of ice patches, going back, even into the 1920s. Not myself, of course, but other folks were taking photos of these things, not necessarily for their archaeological significance, but you just documenting the landscape. And when you can start to look back on these things through time, you realize that we've just made yet another important page in the book, the life history book of some of these locations. And I think it's a neat opportunity to be able to incorporate one's own thoughts on that sort of a space, and then recognize, of course, that the subsequent generations, hopefully, you're going to have the opportunity to write additional pages into this story.
Thank you, Craig, for that description. And I wanted to ask you, and then also would like to toss this to Shane after, is this idea of communicating scientific information, but not to a scientific audience. And I wanted to ask you, Craig, if you felt like when you were working on this piece, if you were using a different part of your brain, and sort of how you chose to structure or pick and choose the items, and what kind of detail or what kind of things you highlighted. And eventually I'd like to work back around to Shane, who I think very much being in the field of education and having a background in storytelling and in oration, how you communicate these really interesting, complex ideas, but not to a scientific audience. So Craig, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks. That's a very good question. I don't know if I was using a different part of my brain or not.
Put you in an MRI.
Yeah,
trying to put the content into that image. But I think one of the things, and I did just glance back at it actually, because I took a picture of it, and one of the things that I could see is that I usually try to do this in the all of the work that I do, is I try to be inclusive and acknowledge all of the, well, not all, it's impossible to acknowledge all, but to note many of the different folks that are influencing the research, try to talk a little bit about the value of the research, and not just from my own eyes, but of course, probably poorly paraphrasing colleagues, but trying to convey that, right, there's nothing really especially important about me actually working on this project. It's the whole package, the nature of the information that is potentially there, our opportunity to engage with it, in the hope that we're doing something meaningful for past and present and future generations. And I think that some of the tidbits of information that I put in there, with, for instance, the bighorn sheep skulls, which I said we'd radiocarbon dated. Well, there are colleagues wonderfully at Montana State University who have been successful in working with other colleagues in the University of California system, like Dr. Beth Shapiro, who's another ancient genomics expert. She works with faunal material, unlike Eska Villersev, who's another colleague, and a colleague through Shane. But they're have actively succeeded in extracting ancient DNA from these now radiocarbon dated bighorn sheep remains, and are able to sort of look through time at other bighorn sheep remains that they've gotten ancient DNA from, and compare that to modern bighorn species. The modern bighorn that are living in the area, compare the genetic signatures between those modern sheep and the ancient sheep to try to resolve patterns and tease out possible inferences about ancient sheep behavior. So this is an example of just one aspect of the science that can come from these archives, these ice patch archives. So too, the opportunity to work again with colleagues like Shane Doyle, but also all of the colleagues that we worked with up in Glacier National Park as a part of a multi-year National Park Service funded study that was incorporating both the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes and the Blackfeet Nation as partners, where we had regular interaction and engagement in the field on the part of all those parties, and just basically listening and trying to, what I've tried to do is repeat in some of the text on this image, what, some of my tribal colleagues were trying to say the value in this project was for them. And I think my friend and colleague, Francis Auld, is one of the person's words who keep resonating with me, but he said it's not about, creating a memorial to the past and getting more materials incorporated into a repository somewhere. This is about finding things that are of value for sustaining the living cultures. So the living culture of the tribes, making this past relevant to them and for future generations. And I'm never going to be able to say anything as eloquent as that. And again, I'm probably misparaphrasing. But that's my best stab at this.
I love that, Craig. It's a collaboration on this two-dimensional format that's very visual, but you're incorporating all of these aspects of the project and all the people you worked with and that information, and putting it into a really visually interesting and engaging format. So I think that's incredibly exciting aspect of what you all are doing together. And I'm wondering, Shane, if you could also speak a little bit. I mean, working with ESCA and working on this project, how you communicate is the scientific information that's swirling around you to a non-science audience. How do you think about that? How do you approach that?
Yeah, that's the challenge, I think, and especially in this day and age when science is under such, an attack, it feels like, from the public. And even though it's gotten us this far, and I really feel like, there's nothing inherently immoral about science, and I guess the reason why I say that and bring that up in this context is just thinking about, a lot of Native people don't necessarily appreciate or understand how archaeology benefits them, because there has been such a disconnect over the years. And, thinking about, how human remains were taken and stuff, and how archaeology played a role in that. And I think those are the types of concepts, I think, and histories that we should be getting across to students, because we want to also include in this day and age, in our understanding of science, where science has come from, where it's going, and how, the culture of the day has directed the movement of science. And now we have a great opportunity here to celebrate the collaboration that we have going here. Craig and I have worked with many Native people over the years. I mean, Francis Auld, I met Francis when I was working with Eska Willerslev, and we went up to Salish Kootenai. Now, we're still friends after all this time, of course. And I've seen him at Crow Fair, and, so it's a really small world, I think. I think maybe I'm kind of digressing from the answer, but
I think you guys are, yeah. Go ahead. I was going to say, I think you're both coming around to this point about the work that you're talking about and being done, really that science has to be relevant today to the people today who are involved in part of the collaboration. It's not just science for science sake. It's not science without an ethical consideration of descendant communities or other things. There has to be that aspect of it for it to be meaningful. And it seems like that's what you all are focusing on to some degree in this collaboration.
Yeah, I think so. When I design curriculum, that's my thought in mind. How do I take this ancient archaeological science and bring it to young people in a way that they really understand it and appreciate it and want to write songs about it and make plays about it and, daydream about it and wonder about what they could do when they got older. I mean, it's that whole thing of, making science into something that human beings appreciate and see as a vehicle, to take them to places that they otherwise would not be able to go.
Craig, we want to turn back to you again. As a high altitude archaeologist, we wanted to sort of talk about this field a little bit because it's somewhat new. In terms of a decade or two ago, archaeologists weren't looking a whole lot or didn't necessarily know a whole lot about how people actually use these high altitude locations above or around 10,000 feet. Many people assumed these spaces were too harsh to live in. There wasn't a lot of systematic surveys or even remote sensing going on from new technologies like we have now, like drones or even using Google Earth. And the work you've been doing and the work by other people more recently, we're finding that people not only visited these areas and used them, but they lived there for longer periods of time. Now, people think about artifacts when they think of what archaeologists are doing up there and archaeological sites, and we know you've certainly found artifacts and sites at these high-altitude locations. But you're also part of a team that collects a lot of different type of data from a wide range of disciplines. Chemistry, geology, climatology, all these kinds of things. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about what this broader project is like, and then also what we're learning, I think, which is so amazing about what people were doing, sort of the relevance today for sort of our imagination of how people use these landscapes in the past. I think it's fascinating, it's heartening, it tells us something about past climates and past peoples, and we're learning about it through these interdisciplinary collaborations. So take us on a trip with you, sort of mental journey.
Well, thanks. That's a good question, Nancy. I think, right. It's hard to think about how to conceptualize and pack in what has become at this point in time, 19 years worth of research for me, going back all the way to my first experiences with my colleague, Dr. E. James Dixon in Alaska. And recognizing, of course, that those experiences were born of work that was happening with First Nations groups in the Southern Yukon Territory, and then seeing it from the late 1990s, and then bringing that all forward to work in the mid-latitude and Southern Rocky Mountains, so in Colorado, again, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. I think that one of the through lines has been that the ice that's melting, when we recognize that these features were relatively static places on the landscape and consequently had the potential to be very old, and keeping within them, if things happen to be incorporated in them, keeping that material relatively static and stable for a very long period of time. It was just really mind expanding because we recognized them to be archives that contained, first and foremost, the initial interest as an archaeologist was as they contained, artifactual materials, things that were related to people using those high altitude landscapes. And they've been those types of materials. And a lot of it tends to relate to hunting. So, I mean, it could be things like arrow shafts, and dart shafts, but on occasion, and I'm talking about writ large in Western North America, it's been everything from atlatls to snares for animals to basketry to clothing, all kinds of organic cultural material that for some reason, I mean, and it's not for some reason, it's very understandable that those sorts of objects they're more relatable sometimes. A shoe, for instance, is more relatable to a lot of folks today than let's say chipstone artifacts. I mean, we can understand, they're used for cutting or they had other specialized functions, but they're not something that we necessarily are using each and every day and have regular experience with. But everybody can recognize a shoe because most of us put shoes on each day.
Most of the time.
In
Montana anyway. Yeah.
I don't want to disenfranchise the non-shoe wearing people.
Right.
Very, very PC of you. Yeah, exactly.
Portion of the demographic we're trying to reach. So the thing is there's this incredible suite of information that's there, and then the fact that it's being exposed through this process of melting, it's not something that we go and excavate for. We don't do any kind of invasive work in pursuit of artifactual material in these ice patches. The ice patches are changing the state that they were in. It was never a steady state because the climate has had its peaks and valleys over the last number of millennia. But it seems like in the last probably 5-6 decades, really, there's been an atypical amount of melting that's happening in these locations. And the material that's coming out, as I described it as this organic material, once it is free of the ice, all of these processes of decay can kick back in. Not can, they will, they do, and rapidly so. So there's a very narrow window in which we can encounter this material and engage with it. It's not like chipstone. It's not incredibly resilient. Chipstone is an inorganic type of technology that persists, right, for a long period of time under a variety of conditions, including very harsh conditions. But organic artifacts, atlatl darts, for instance, they're just not going to survive once they come out of that preservative environment. And then radiocarbon dating those organic artifacts, we get a sense that there's in no way, shape, or form are these things recent. Although we do have some things that are only a couple hundred years old, we also have things that are more than 10,000 years old. And so the recognition that the ice that had contained some of this cultural material had been in place in some locations for 5,000 years, other locations for 8,000 years, and then in one particular location, more than 10,000 years. If 10,000 years worth of ice has melted away and exposed these archaeological materials, there's something radical, right, that's occurring in these locations. And we've tried to impress upon our colleagues, and there's a good number of them at this point in time, that these are archives that contain not only the cultural material, but they also contain this incredible swath of biological material, that everything from ancient trees that record old forest locations before the ice patches grew, to the biological materials like the bighorn sheep, to, not kidding you, I mean, copious amounts of dung that are left from the animals that go to these ice patches.
I hear those can smell rather fresh too when they start.
They can. They don't always. I've gotten used to it.
So you're not necessarily objective anymore.
Yeah.
No. Actually, I'm going to even go so far as to say there's something vaguely pleasant.
You're like, yay, it's just dung. Well, you know what's in the dung. We need that information.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It almost sounds like salvage archaeology as well as climatic studies and other things. There's so much information, like Ian, when you've talked about ice cores from Antarctica, these places, they contain a wealth of information about the atmosphere and the climate. So it's not just the artifacts and the archaeology you're talking about, but there is sort of a race to preserve this as it's melting, Craig.
Yeah. No, there is. And right, we've been, like I said, we've been trying to maximize our return on field efforts, because these locations, again, I've described it, and I think you opened up with this, maybe that these are spaces that we collectively, at least sort of in the sort of post-colonial, maybe more Eurocentric view, didn't perceive to be occupied at points in the past, and consequently we now manage these spaces in such a way that people are not seen as being an integral part of that landscape, although the archaeology just says that they are there since time immemorial. So I mean, as long as we have records, and that's consistent with oral histories of tribal groups, of course, as well. But right, it's very difficult to go to some of these locations and get research accomplished. And so we sort of have, not only an urgency and a salvage aspect to it, but then we're also shackled to some degree by the way that we perceive and advertise these ecosystems as being in existence, right? We don't allow for scientific research to proceed very easily in some of these locations. I'll just say, a quick shout out to my colleagues inside Yellowstone National Park. For the very first time this year, we were actually able to use a helicopter to get a research team to one of the very important locations that's associated with the park. And that's been a dream and an exercise that I've been working on for the last 13 years to be able to get the permission set up to do that. Wow. We're hoping that can be a harbinger of good things to come in terms of facilitating this type of research.
Yeah. Well, another thing that made me think of talking to the three of you is that I was traveling over the Beartooth Pass with a friend a few months ago, and we did the obligatory where you get out and you take your picture with the Beartooth Pass sign in the background. And, we opened the door, and it was, below where we had driven up from in Red Lodge was probably 70 degrees. And we got outside the door there, and it was about 20 degrees. The wind was blowing ferociously, and we had to take our picture and get back in the car in the matter of 5 minutes so we didn't freeze to death. And so, you guys, I think, were up there that same weekend, and that made me really think about this landscape, and that people lived on this landscape, they traveled on this landscape that we hardly ever go to, and it's hard to get to. Like you said, Craig, you need a helicopter to get up there and do this work a lot. I mean, you're happy to have a helicopter to get up there and do this work, whereas people were much more mobile and going into these landscapes that we tend to avoid nowadays. So I think that's just fascinating. But I wanted to follow up with Ian and Ian, ask you a question, and then maybe throw it to everybody else quickly as we kind of wrap up our conversation. But Ian, as you've been working with Craig and Shane over these past few months and these past few years, what are some of the things that, what are the benefits of this collaboration that you've seen yourself in your work? And why do you think collaborations like this should happen in the future?
That's a good question, hard question. Sharing of knowledge. Personally, I've benefited a great deal in terms of my understanding of climate change and deep time. And, my intent is hopefully to share some of that knowledge I've gained with a larger audience so that, an understanding of what has happened in the past, what does the climate look like in the past, what have humans done in the past, and what that might mean as we move forward into a climate crisis. How might humans adapt? How might we think about preserving natural spaces? I think an understanding of the past, a knowledge of the past, a caring of the past might hopefully bring about some empathy for the natural world, what we're losing, what's changing, and how we might think about that going into the future. What we might do about it.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, Shane, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, yeah, Ian, great point. Just made me think, the proof's in the pudding, the photographs that go along with the science. That's what really makes people, have that aha moment. You have to see it. And I think that that's so convincing. And it's so important to have Ian along. And in just any kind of visual or way to communicate that information out to the public. We did a short video on the ice patch archaeology that came out a couple years ago, and Craig helped to produce that. And I was one of the folks featured in there. And that I've showed that video to I don't know how many people, and it's always a hit. And so, and the music that goes along with it. And so I think there's an artistic quality to this that Ian brings, that is essential. And then I'm trying to, act as a bridge to the native culture, and just again make it relevant. Could you rephrase that question? I think I kind of got lost there.
Yeah. You really answered it, Shane. It was just the importance of this work together, of this collaboration together, and something that you've seen and learned from it. And, talking about Ian's photos, that visual aspect really answered that, that visual aspect you've seen is so critical to this collaborative work and to the work that you do, Shane, bringing, storytelling and bringing these stories to life and bringing this science to life. Ian does it through a visual means and you do it through a verbal means. But I think that you answered the question. To me, anyway.
And I think we can link to that video. That's a lovely video. I've seen it myself. So we'll make that available to the listeners. That is a really powerful way to also explore this collaboration.
Yeah.
We should do more of those. And, now that we have Eska Willerslev on our team and Ian, we have more voices to include. We have new ice patches that we've looked at. The patch that we looked at this past fall, late this summer, was just so unique and spectacular as far as what was hidden underneath with that ancient forest. The fact that ancient forest was up there leads to a whole nother, spin-off story about how it was there, why it died, how the ice patches came about. I mean, there's just so much to learn from. And, I have to say it's been wonderful to be a part of this podcast, but it just is not long enough to do justice to all the rich information that's coming out of these things and all the great stuff that we're doing. But so thankful that folks get an opportunity at least to hear a little bit about what we're doing.
Yeah, I know. It's, it is just a little bit of a short time period to visit with all three of you, but hopefully we'll have you all back to speak more in depth again in the future as well. But Craig, throw it to you at the end here and your reflections on what this collaboration between the three of you has brought to you in developing your knowledge and adding to the knowledge that you have of these landscapes, of these high altitude landscapes.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, again, first and foremost, it's wonderful to be here. There's no way really it's fair to have a podcast with just one person. I know that I'm on Zoom, and so I very much feel like I'm a talking head at this point in time. But, having, Ian and Shane sitting in, it goes to show you the breadth of the different experiences and opportunities and desires that we're trying to capitalize on by sharing this research as widely as we can. I guess my efforts at this point in time are really trying to continue to build momentum and to get other parties interested in the nature of ice patch research, not just the archaeology, but ice patch research in total, because I do think that it's endangered, right? We have very real evidence that very ancient ice is melting. I tend to now co-opt some of the words of my colleague Tom McGovern when he talks about the burning of the ancient library at Alexandria and the loss of information sort of for all of humanity on a part of the ancient world when that library was destroyed. Well, I think very much the destruction of our collective cultural resources, our cultural heritage. I can't stand the word resources. It sounds like something we're going to extract. The memory of where we have been and the physical proof of our existence in these myriad locations, and be that along the coastlines, which are endangered due to rising sea level, or in the high alpine where the ice is melting, we are at risk of losing this connection. And what I don't want to see happen is that loss to occur with no one on watch. I don't know that we can necessarily stop it, but I don't want it to happen and no one be there to observe it and bear witness to it occurring, because we owe it to future generations to see with our own eyes as this process occurs. And we want to make sure that we can get as many eyes as possible. And I mean well-meaning eyes, those eyes that are open to seeing it for what it is. I think I'm babbling now, but that's...
No, that's great. That's great. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. We're coming to the end of our time today, but we wanted to thank all three of you for being here and discussing this fascinating work that you all do. And if people would like to learn more about each of your work separately, do you have websites that you could point folks to, Ian?
Yep, I have a personal website, ianvancoller.com. And yeah, the collaboration I did with Craig is up there on the homepage of my website, as well as multiple other collaborations with other scientists.
Okay, Craig, do you have a website or so you could point people to?
Yeah, I did. We did collectively have a project website that, of course, went down. So, the one I think that folks might get the most information out of would be something called Frozen Pasts. So it's FROZENPASTS 5, and then the number 5. And you can find that at instar.colorado.edu. That's a website for an upcoming international meeting on ice patch archaeology. It's sort of synthesizing all of the work that's occurring globally, but the meeting is going to occur here in the Rocky Mountains. And that's maybe the best portal at present that's functioning. I can maybe send you a link.
Okay, we'll post that. Yeah.
And Shane, do you have a website you could point people to?
I do have a website. It's still kind of under construction, but there's a lot on there. It's nativenexus.net.
Okay, thank you. So it's been incredibly wonderful to have all three of you with us today. And to all our listeners, we want to thank you so much for joining us today and hearing about this fantastic collaborative project about ice patch research. And we hope that you can join us again and find out more about the dirt on the past. If you're enjoying the Dirt on the Past, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Also, please tell your friends and leave us a review. It really helps people find us. We're a new podcast and are trying to grow our listener base, so please share. Thanks, and thanks for listening.
You've been listening to The Dirt on the Past, a podcast of the Extreme History Project and Gallatin Valley Community Radio, KGVM. To hear more episodes, visit our website at theextremehistoryproject.org. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep searching out the dirt on the past.